We still in the mountains of Minnesota. It's getting really school in here. I know you weren't ready for that, Mike, but we're back. Team recap. We talking about the Minnesota Vikings. How you doing?
I'm doing all right, man. A little bit worse after the skull, like you said. It was kind of unexpected, but how are you?
I'm hanging in there, man. We're in the hometown. We got the NFC North. This is our bread and butter, so let's keep it going.
Let's keep
So
it
as we
going.
keep it going, let's get into the draft class. And before we even get in the draft class, it's impressive you fit this many names on one PowerPoint slide. That's a lot of names.
Those 15, that's definitely the most we've had so far, but it might be the most out of anybody. I'm not 100% sure, but it's kind of wild.
Yeah, day three looks like it was just basically Minnesota picking. But past that, what are some of your thoughts on the draft class?
So, draft class was an interesting one because I don't want to say never before, obviously, but I think the Vikings were the only team this offseason to lose really three all pro caliber players in Stefon Diggs, Everson Griffin, and Xavier Rhodes. So obviously we knew going in wide receiver, cornerback, and kind of DN were going to be their main needs. So kind of following suit, I like the Jefferson Gladney picks. I think that Jefferson actually kind of does a lot of the stuff that Stefon Diggs did well. I think that he's primarily going to operate from the slot, obviously. He's not really a take the top off the defense type guy, which I think maybe Minnesota might have wanted there. I kind of wonder if they would have preferred a Rieger or someone who went, just before Jefferson. But I do think that we've kind of seen that formula work with Diggs and Thielen for the last couple of years. So I don't really see a problem there. And then Gladney's just a solid. He's kind of a solid all around corner. He gives good effort against the run. He's kind of sticky in man coverage. Not the best, obviously, but that's why he went 31. So I can't really hate the pick there. It was kind of tough to differentiate between like him, Jalen Johnson, Trevon Diggs, and that group. So obviously they did kind of pick like that first guy there. So it was kind of interesting that he was the one, but it is what it is. Other than that, there were a lot of solid picks. I think like Urza Cleveland was solid value. I really like the value out of Troy Dye in the fourth round. I thought he could have went in the third. Even in like Kenny Willicke's or you say Kenny Wilkes in the seventh round. I think that he kind of could have been like a fifth round guy out of Michigan State. Well, I mean, last year coming in, people thought he was maybe going to be a day one, early day two guy, and you get him in the seventh round. I don't really see how you can complain with that. Obviously, there were a couple other picks that I'm not super familiar with. I don't know a lot about like James Lynch or DJ Wonham, guys who should have pivotal roles on the D line with the loss of Griffin and Linval, which we'll touch on later. But yeah, I mean, what were your kind of general thoughts?
Yeah, a lot of volume, and I don't think they really needed the volume. They're a good team. Still a good roster. I don't understand why they didn't use some of this capital to kind of move up and maybe get a little bit more choice in the players they would have liked. And obviously, I don't know if Jefferson was their first choice at wide receiver with some of those other players, but there's a lot of capital there. The point they didn't try to move up for one of those top three wide receivers, I think it's kind of a waste. I think it was a lost opportunity there. I think they could have kind of moved around the draft class a little bit more and used some of that capital because most of these players are not going to be making the final cut when it comes. So other than that, I do like some of the players. I think they got they got okay value. I don't think if I had to grade this class, which I don't really like the grades, but it's very average. It just feels like a C plus. I think that's what this, like, I'm not knocking, but I'm not loving. It feels like a solid C plus.
I would probably lean more towards the B, maybe B plus range, but I do completely agree that what they probably should have done, and maybe they tried doing, obviously we're not in the boardrooms, but I do think that you could have probably taken some of those, even that third round pick, those fourth round picks, some of those fives and sixes, paired those with that first one, and with guys like CD and Judy going kind of later than we expected. I think you probably could have got in that 14 or even like 16 with Atlanta picking AJ Terrell there. I think that you probably could have convinced them like, hey, we'll give you guys 3 extra picks on between day 2 and 3. And I think you could have maybe got, I don't even want to say maybe, you would have got a much better player because even though Justin Jefferson is definitely worthy of a first round pick, CD and Judy were just on the next level. So I think when CD was there, even past like 15, once you see like 16 and 17, I think that you really should be calling and trying to make use of these 4s, 5s, and 6s. But other than that, I mean, I think they did fill a lot of, I don't want to say a lot of holes, but I think they filled their most kind of pressing needs, if that makes sense. And then they got a lot of developmental guys off of that. So from there, do you want to hop into the offensive depth charts?
Yeah, let's get it.
So right away, what you'll kind of see is it looks pretty similar to last year, Mike. So obviously you lose Diggs and a couple guys in the O-line, but what are your kind of general thoughts on this offense compared to maybe what it was in 2019?
Yeah, it does look a lot of the same, but I think losing a player like Diggs, I think you can't say this is better. It's worse. And, like, obviously I think giving Brian O'Neill another year of experience at tackle is nice. They got some of the offensive linemen, giving them some more experience. Tajay Sharp's an interesting kind of third option. Irv Smith, I'm hoping he kind of takes over that number one tight end role. I've never been a huge fan of Kyle Rudolph. He's been, like, I guess if you're looking for a tight end that can get you 600 yards and like 5 touchdowns a year, he's your guy. But I think you should want more than that. I think Irv Smith has a chance to be more than that. But obviously losing Diggs, I just don't see a real upgrade or even, I guess, go back to the draft. This was a good draft, but with the capital you got from that trade, did you really make the most out of it? Did you get a value similar to Diggs? I'm not sure I see it. And I do like Justin Jefferson, though, and this is still – it might be one of the most complete rosters still in the NFC North. So I think in their division they still can compete, and I still think this is a really solid offense, to say the least.
I agree with that for the most part. I think the real question to me is, will Adam Thielen be able to stay healthy? I mean, last year he didn't play in very many games, and he only had 418 yards in the games that he did play. So really, Diggs was your number one receiver last year, undoubtedly your number one receiver actually, with Dalvin Cook kind of being the offense's number one weapon. So I think the real question here is, can Thielen kind of take that role back that he had 2 years ago, and then can Jefferson kind of supplement him behind the rest of that offense? I do think that the offensive line, getting guys like Elflein, Bradbury, and O'Neal extra years of experience, I think that's huge. Not exactly sure if like Riley Reef and Dakota Dozier should necessarily be their starting left tackle or right guards, but I do think that this is really a solid offense. I mean, last year they were, I believe, 8th in points scored in the league, so I don't know if it looks like they're going to be that high this year, just based off the names, but I do think that this is definitely an above average offense for sure.
Yeah, and I want to bring up something else. We often talk about kind of when that number 2 wide receiver becomes the number 1 option, or sometimes even really the only option or quality option, seeing how they perform when they lose that number 1, that superstar, kind of like Juju Smith-Schuster after Antonio Brown left in similar situations like this. Obviously, they were both – Diggs and Thielen kind of came on the scene pretty hand in hand. So it'll be interesting to see both of them separate from each other. And I think it'll speak a lot to Thielen, like how much of it was being able to you really couldn't tell what wide receiver was going to get most of the coverage, because they were both very solid. They were both pretty, I want to say equal, but it was a 1A, 1B situation. So I'll be interested to see how Thielen performs after the injury and as well without a Diggs on the other side.
No, I agree. And I think the problem with Jefferson then, compared to like a CD or Judy, is that Jefferson probably is going to be operating out of that slot position. So I really don't know, whereas Diggs was more so an outside receiver, I don't really think that Thielen's ever going to get any like reprieve this year. And I do agree that like how he handles that will be really interesting. And really kind of Kirk Cousins' success is going to depend on it because, like you said, Kyle Rudolph, he's a solid player. I think Tajay Sharp's a solid player. But there's really no game changers here outside of, obviously, like Dalvin Cook and Adam Thielen. So that being said, do you want to hop on a defense?
Let's get it. And I could start off here because just something that kind of jumps out to me. I think for quite a few years, the strength of this team has been the defense. And I'm not sure that's the case anymore. Last year, we started seeing that kind of taking the turns and it kind of going over the offense. I think this year it definitely is the offense. I think that offense needs to score and this defense needs to keep up. Before, I think it was the other way around. The defense had made stops and the offense just had to score enough points to beat the other team. this defense is good, not great. I think the front seven has been one of their strengths. And I wouldn't say the front seven are the strengths. The linebacking core is still a strength. And I don't see that moving anytime soon. But that interior defensive line doesn't look like what it did a couple years ago. Obviously, Michael Pierce is a nice player. I think he's perfect for what they're looking for. They have linebackers that can run, and they got a body in Michael Pierce, to say the least. So I think that's a nice pickup. And obviously, Daniel Hunter has been solid since he's been drafted by the team. So I think they still have some nice pieces, but it's not the defense it once was. This is not. I don't see this being a top tier defense in the NFL this year.
I agree to a point because so like last year they were fifth in the league in points allowed, as in fifth best. So the problem is it looks kind of similar to that defense last year, but they didn't make many additions, and there were those couple huge subtractions. I think going from like losing a guy like Everson Griffin, I do think that that's huge. I think that losing, even though Xavier Rhodes didn't necessarily play that great last year, it's not just Xavier Rhodes. It's Xavier, Trey Waynes, and Mackenzie Alexander. Your top three corners are all gone. I think that obviously now you're expecting Mike Hughes to take a huge step up, and obviously Jeff Gladney, you spent the 31st pick on him. So, I mean, you kind of expect huge things out of him, along with that safety duo we were kind of talking before we came on. I personally think that that's the best safety duo in the league. I think that that'll help those young corners a lot, but I do agree that this defense has already kind of peaked. I don't think that there's much room for kind of upward movement, considering you've stripped away a lot of the parts of the team. And that is kind of something that we talked about in like the Chiefs video, for instance, in which once you pay that quarterback a bunch of money, you kind of have to start pulling pieces from other parts of the team. And I believe that that's kind of what we saw here with Kirk Cousins. Do you agree with that? Or
Yeah, for sure. And I guess with that, something we've talked about quite a bit, I think obviously they have the safeties, but two young corners, unproven corners, and one being a rookie, which is a hard position to transition to. I think there's probably some free agents available that could help this team out a lot. I think they need a pass rush. I think that getting a pass rush will definitely help those corners kind of develop. And if that quarterback has to throw the ball just a little bit quicker, these are smaller guys, but they're fast. I think they can hold to a certain point, but again, it's going to be a learning curve. So I think a player like Ziggy Ansah, obviously Everson Griffin seems like it's a good fit, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. Or if they have some, money in the pocket, maybe a one-year deal with like a player like Jadeveon Clowney. It might be the impact player they need, and it might change a little bit my thought on this defense.
so real quick, I actually did just look at their cap, and it's right around 12, 14 million, depending on if their rookies are signed or not. So they don't have a ton of money, but I do think that you could still make an impact signing. I think a guy like a Jabal Sheard, for instance, or like you said, Ziggy Ansah, I think that those are guys who would fit their prototypical 4-3 defense and would really be able to thrive and help, as you said, reduce the amount of time that those young corners have to cover. And I think that that would be huge in helping them compete now, because kind of as we'll get to next, I'm not sure if this team is necessarily the front runner in the NFC North. I actually think that they're kind of in that mid-range where it's like you don't know if they're going to be – they could win the division, but it looks more like they're fighting for second or third and kind of vying for a wild card spot. So with that being said, what kind of on the schedule stands out to you as games that will prove if the Vikings can be a first-place team this upcoming year?
Yeah, and I guess I'm going to kind of give a general statement about the NFC North and how I feel about it. It's not the powerhouse division it once was. I don't think they have the depth. I don't think even that competition between Green Bay, Vikings, and maybe a little bit lesser the Lions, I don't think it's there this year. I think this might look a little bit like the NFC East did, the last couple years over a couple. So I don't know. I think a good game, I think a good solid foundation game for them will be at Texans. I think that's a good game to see how they match up. I think it's obviously they have some young pieces on the defense. I'd like to see how those corners go against a wide receiving duo like Brandon Cooks and Will Fuller. I think that's a good matchup. I think that's pretty, for talent-wise, I think right around where they're going to be, and I think it's a pretty good game. After that, I think it's actually the next week at Seattle. I think that's a good game. Obviously, interdivision. I always feel like Seattle outperforms their actual talent in the roster. So that's how I've always felt about them. I think they've always had a good team. They've always had some great players, but just all around, I always felt like they've had holes. So I'll be interested to see that matchup. I think that's going to be a good matchup, and I think it's pretty fair. And it could be even a playoff matchup we might see. So I think that's going to be a good matchup also in the season.
So obviously, Mike, by interdivision, you meant interconference with the Seahawks. And I think another game, interconference, that would be really interesting is the Cowboys there, kind of late in November. Now we're going to get to see if those corners have taken the steps that they need to, going against obviously Amari, CD, Michael Gallup, having that kind of untested D line face Ezekiel Elliott in their offensive line. I think that'll be a really interesting matchup, along with the Saints down there on Christmas Day. I think that obviously the Vikings have kind of upset the Saints back-to-back years in the playoffs, and I really think that New Orleans might be coming out trying to get some revenge on Minnesota, and this might be the year, considering, as we said, Minnesota has kind of maybe taken a step back in the NFC. So other than that, Mike, do you have anything else to talk about in terms of the schedule or just the team in general?
No, I think it'd be an interesting year for them. I think it's definitely a transition year, and I don't see how they got better. I think that's my taking point for this team is, and I think this was a great opportunity. I think the NFC North is more open than it's ever been. I really, obviously, we'll get into it in a video coming up, but I don't think Green Bay is the powerhouse it once was. As we are Lions fans, who knows? Who cares at that point? And we've went over the Bears. So we know, how at least I feel about that. So I think the division's more open than it's ever been, and I just don't think they really capitalized on that opportunity.
I think that the problem is that the Vikings are kind of on par in terms of like progression within the division, but in terms of the NFC in general, I think they have really taken a step back. Like we saw, obviously, the Eagles and Cowboys in the NFC East portion of our series. Those are two teams that got markedly better, and I don't think the Vikings are really to that level anymore. Whereas last year, I would have said that the Vikings were definitely better than those two teams. So I think it'll be really interesting coming up this year because even if they do make the playoffs, I kind of wonder and I kind of fear that there'll be like a wild card exit or even a divisional round exit as they have been the last couple of years. Because at the end of the day, even though I think Kirk Cousins showed us a good bit of positive stuff last year, and the guy was throwing almost 70% completions, but I don't think that he's the type of guy to carry a team. And I think that this is the year, more so than any other years, that they're really going to need a quarterback or somebody to really put them on their back. And I don't really know if he can do that. So with that being said, in terms of putting stuff on our backs, we're kind of putting the NFL offseason on our back, Mike. We're kind of carrying this thing here. Doubt. We're carrying quarantine 2020. We're on day, what is it, Mike, 374? So
it has to be close.
It has to be close. So with that being said, if you think we're carrying quarantine, all four of you that are going to watch this, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. If you guys say, hey, will you please do the Jacksonville Jaguars next? Mike, who are we going to do next?
I guess we'll do the Jacksonville Jaguars. Please don't ask for the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we'd be contractually bound to do the Jaguars next, but like we really don't want to. So please don't comment them. But anyone else will do. So with that being said, Mike.
Hey, we mic'd up. Now we mic'd out.